G'day from Australia. My name is Ashley Davis. Welcome to my coding live stream. These sessions are recorded live, but available later on YouTube for you to watch whenever you want. We are building the Photosphere application as I try and explain myself while I'm coding. Surprisingly difficult. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, and you can see my handle at all times on the screen. Before we get into coding, I'll just start with the tradition we have here in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm doing these live streams to support my book, Rapid Fullstack Development. You can find it at rapidfullstackdevelopment.com. You can read the first chapter for free online. Today is the last in a long series of live streams that I've been doing for quite a while now. Actually, this series has been going on for just over 5 weeks. Can you believe it? You can catch up on all the previous live stream sessions on my YouTube channel, Code Capers. Look for playlists, find the Rapid Fullstack Development playlist and click View Playlist. And after every live stream, I upload the videos here. So there's a lot to catch up on if you haven't been following along the whole time. All the code that I'm developing in these live streams is put on GitHub later. So look for the Rapid Fullstack Development page on GitHub. You can find a whole bunch of repos here that we've been working on throughout the live stream series. Today we're continuing to work on the front end, which is that repository there, Photosphere Frontend live stream. And we're also going to be running and doing a bit of coding actually as well in the back end, which is the Photosphere monolithic backend live stream repo. I've got a couple of repos that I've prepared in between live streams just because, I wanted to wrap up today, so I didn't have time to do all this coding live. So there are a couple of things here that I've done in between live streams, and I'm going to explain that to you in just a moment. So the thing we're trying to build, the front end we're trying to build for Photosphere, looks a bit like Google Photos. It's a photo gallery. We are close. We are close to having something that looks like this. So today I'm wrapping up this series of working on the front end. There will be more to come in the future, of course. We've only just sort of really got to the starting point of developing this application, but it is a good starting point. And today we're going to deal with some loose ends, like I promised we're going to set the base URL from an environment variable. We're going to be using a React Reft to actually get the width of the gallery so we can expand the photos in the gallery all the way to the edge of the gallery. And also we're going to be adding some support for pagination, which is something that we've got to make some changes in the back end to achieve that. So in this session, we'll actually be working across both front end and back end. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's get into it. One thing I'm going to be doing today is a big test. I'm going to be uploading 100 photos. Now, to achieve that, I've actually downloaded 100 photos. Now, I didn't do this manually. I wrote some code to do this. Let's look at the code repositories I've got here. If you remember back 5 weeks ago, if you were watching this then, you will have watched me create the random gallery generator. So this is something that will basically use the Unsplash API to get a data set of random photos. It didn't actually download the photos though. It just kind of downloaded the URLs for them and the metadata and stuff like that. And that was enough. That was enough for me to use as test data to build out the photo gallery front end. In between live streams, what I've done is I've basically upgraded that. So this is available on GitHub as well if you want to have a look at the code. In fact, I'm going to quickly show you the code for this now. But this is like an upgrade to the random gallery generator, the random gallery test data downloader. And this downloads actually like a whole bunch of photos that I can use for testing. So let's just open this in Visual Studio Code and have a quick look at it. So if we just have a look at the main JavaScript code file here, if you watch that original kind of creation of the random gallery generator, this will look pretty familiar. So for each request to the Unsplash API, using this URL that's put into a variable up here, the maximum photos you can get is 30. The maximum you can get is 30 at a time, but I wanted to get 100, and that's why I've kind of put this in a for loop here. So I'm sort of downloading in batches of 30. It ends up being more than 100 because it gets like four batches of 30 or something like that. So we've got slightly over 100 photos. I've pre-downloaded all the photos into the downloads images directory here. So you can see I've got a bunch of JPEGs there. I've also downloaded all the metadata, even though I don't really need it today. Let me show you that. So I've downloaded all the metadata as JSON files for each photo, but it's really just the JPEGs that I've downloaded. And I can't download that live because we'll just sit here watching photos download. So that's not very interesting to watch. So that's one of the reasons why I did that in between live streams. But I've got all those photos now, and we're going to upload those in a moment just to do a test run. So one thing I've done here is you'll see here that I'm only downloading the thumb. So I'm digging down into the metadata for each photo in the URLs and getting the thumb. So each of these photos that I've downloaded is really small. Now, ultimately, what I'd like to do is to actually have high-resolution photos work with this and be able to upload high-resolution photos and have the Photosphere application itself automatically generate the thumbnails. But I'm not going to have time to get to that today, and that might be a good exercise for the future anyway. So we might talk about some of that future stuff towards the end of the session today. Before I start, I'm just going to run the tests on the front end. I'm just running the automated tests here. So npm test is the convention, and it's going to run jest. And I just want to make sure that I've got passing tests. I just want to make sure that I'm not starting from, a broken code base, basically. There's not many tests, but, the things that I've tested, that I've coded and I've tested, I know they work. We're working on something that's very visual here, though, as well. So we need to do a visual test. I want to get down to the back end here. So I'm going into the back end code repository, starting in development mode with live reload. So this should be giving a fresh development database to work with, an empty development database. I could check that the database is empty. Sometimes it's good to check these things before you start doing a test run, but I'm trying to move a little bit quickly today, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to run the front end. Actually, I'll just open the front end in VS Code first. Come back to the front end in a moment, and I will run my front end. So I'm just off the bat, I'm just going to see how it handles uploading 100 photos. I know that there's some things yet I have to do, and we'll do another test run after I've done those things. So here is the gallery. There's no photos here because we haven't uploaded any. So we'll go to the upload page here. So here, 100 photos. These are all just thumbnails, so they're all small. They'll upload really quick. We don't have to spend we haven't even written any code to generate thumbnails. So ultimately, this would be uploading high-resolution photos, but it's a good stepping stone, and it's a good testing process just to test with small amounts of data anyway. So we have actually tested in the last session that we could upload, a small handful of photos, but this is the first time that we're uploading a load of photos. So it's listed all the photos here in the web page that are going to be uploaded. I'm going to click the upload button. I'm going to have a look in the dev console just to see what's happening there. Cool. That was pretty quick. So I did put in some informational messages there to tell me what was being uploaded, and I think it got all the way to the last one. So that was really quick because these are just thumbnails. And also it's not uploading to anywhere on the internet, of course, as well. I have the backend running locally on this development computer, and so the testing process is really quick because of that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at the gallery. So let's go back to the home page. Cool. So we've got a lot of photos here. Now they're not lined up correctly. They should be lined up correctly along this right-hand sort of green border here. That's the way we designed this, but they're not. And that's because in the last session, if you remember, I hard-coded all the widths and the heights of the photos to 255, 255, which basically messes with the algorithm that computes the layout. So it's not going to compute the layout correctly yet. We've got to go back into the front-end code, and we've got to fix that problem before this is going to work. So I think it's a good opportunity to do that now. I want to show you a little prototype that I did in between live streams. So this is available on GitHub as well if you want to have a look at it yourself. I'm going to briefly run through what this does. So this is like a separate prototype, a separate test bed. When you're building an application, like Photosphere is pretty small at the moment, right? It's tiny at the moment. But when you're working on a real production application, they get huge. They get really complicated. If you want to try something new, learn how to do something, like at the moment what I want to do is I want to basically be able to load an image in the browser and pull the resolution out of it so that we know that resolution and we can give that information to the backend. And then later on, that comes back into the gallery and we use that resolution to compute the aspect ratio and compute the layout and that kind of thing. But to figure out how to write that code, it's kind of difficult, plugging that or experimenting and stuff like in a production application. So it's always a good idea to make a new little project. I based this off my React Parcel template, which I created way back at the beginning of the live stream. So I've been experimenting with code here, a bit of a combination of kind of reading docs on Mozilla, looking at stuff on Stack Overflow, and then just writing code and playing with it and seeing how it works. And it's much like any of the coding that I've done in the live stream so far. Write a little bit of code, do some console logging to work out what it is that I'm working with. You can see that I've got an input field here which allows us to choose files. I figured out how to do that in the last session. But what I'm doing now is I've added a bunch of new functions here for loading the file. So this is the file that we kind of choose in our input. So we load that. We're using the file reader API and then reading that to a data URL and returning that. So when our files have changed, we can basically here loop through all files, load the image data to a data URL, pass the image data into this other function here that's going to pull out our image resolution. So let's have a quick look at that. So get image resolution here calls load image, which basically creates a HTML image element. Now this is not displayed on screen. It's just created in the JavaScript and it's hidden. And when it's loaded, we return that. And when we return that, we can pull out the width and the height of it. It's really kind of fun to play around with images like this in JavaScript. And what we're doing then is we're basically pushing that onto our list of things. So this prototype, I'll run it now so you can actually see it. So this prototype allowed me to experiment and figure out how to load these image files, how to extract the width and the height, get their resolution out of it. Oh, there we go. Cool. So this is based off some really simple HTML where we've got an input. That's the input you can see right here. It allows us to choose some files. We've got a bunch of image files here. Let's just select a bunch of them. Click on open. And then what we're doing at the end here is we're rendering a table. And you can kind of see that table rendered out here, which shows us the image name, the size of it, and the resolution. So these are all thumbnails, so they're really small. I could also just use the metadata, but this is the way that I want this to work, like in production. I want a user to be able to upload any photo, and normally they're going to be high resolution photos, but when they upload a photo, it's got to pull the resolution out of the photo. Now, it's debatable whether we should do this in the front end or the back end, and later on, actually, in a separate live stream series that I might do in the future, we might try doing some of this in the back end, and upgrade the backend to be microservices, because it would be the perfect opportunity to use a microservice to kind of analyze the data, pull out the resolution. There's heaps of other stuff you can do as well, like creating a thumbnail in the backend in a microservice, doing reverse geocoding, extracting the EXIF data. It's like the perfect use case for microservices. But just forget I said that for the moment. Anyway, just forget I said that. We're doing this. We're extracting this information in the front end, and now what I want to do is I want to copy these files over, these files that I've prototyped in this separate project. I want to copy them over to the Photosphere Frontend so we can actually get the correct width and the height right in there. Put my prototype code off to one side, and I've got the front-end code on the right here. So the prototype code is on the left, the front-end code is on the right. I'm going to do this in my upload page, I think. The first thing I want to do is copy these functions over. So I'll put them at the top. Later on, I might refactor these. These would be good to refactor these into a separate image library that I could then include in this application or other applications. There's no need to jump to that straight away. There's no need to kind of quick refactor. It's just better to get it working first. Get it working, test that it works, and then you can refactor it at your heart's content later. And anyway, I don't have time for that in this session, so just got to move on. So this is where I hard-coded the width and the height previously. And so what I want to do here is for each file, so I'm going to make use of these functions that I've just added. I'm going to load my image data, load files, everyone. Yeah. And then I'm going to pull out the image resolution. Oops. Pull out the image resolution using this function, get image resolution from the image data. Let's just get rid of this sidebar so we can see the code a bit better. I'll reuse this log here. I've got the name of it, and let's just put in the image resolution here. So that should be width by image resolution.height. This is not something I would add to production code. This is something that we'd like to remove later. It's just good at the moment just to get that little bit of feedback to know what's happening in our code and to try and check it for errors effectively. So I'm going to plug in the real width here of whatever image the user was choosing to upload. Hopefully that's it. There's not much to it, just using features that are already built into the browser. Let's try it out. So I'll go to my upload page, I'll just try uploading a couple of files before I do the whole 100. So I'll make sure these guys work. I'll upload them. Have a look at my dev tools, my dev console, yep, no errors. Oh, and it's pulled out the width and the height, so that's nice. That's just come together so nicely. And I should be able to see those in the gallery as well. So that's looking cool. All right, now for the big test. Let's try uploading all 100 files again. Okay, got a big list of files to upload. Takes slightly longer probably now because it's got to load those images, those thumbnails, and pull out the resolution of each one. Let's see what this looks like in the gallery. That's looking pretty cool. So you can see here now that there's some big photos here that look a bit odd. That's something I might want to look at later to make sure that that's working correctly. But mostly these photos are looking pretty good. They're lining up against our edge border here. Some of them overlap slightly, but in a moment, I'm going to rectify that, and you'll see how I do that. Otherwise, it's all looking pretty cool. Time for a commit here. Well, we've got some working code that's useful. Let's commit it. So just do a quick diff of what I did there, just a bit of a self-review here. So I've added these new functions that I prototyped in that other project. They're just going straight in. At this point, I'd probably like to remove these console logs, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. Just note that I would like to remove those from production code so that customers or users of this product don't get to see all this extraneous information coming out of the dev console. You can see here where I've replaced the hard-coded width and height with the width and height that I'm loading from the image resolution. That's looking good. Let's get that in. Cool. Okay, let's do some loose ends. Now, one thing that I've been promising to do for the last 2 sessions was to get rid of this hard-coded base URL that you see here. So I've duplicated this variable across multiple files, and it's hard-coded to talk to localhost 3000, which clearly that is not going to work in production. It's only working because that's the way my particular setup works in development. What I want to do is I want to pass this in as an environment variable. And that's super easy to do with Parcel. You can do it with Webpack as well. So instead of having that be that, I want to say process.env, the base URL. And you're probably saying, if you didn't know about this, you're probably saying, how are you using an environment variable in a web page? Well, the fact is that Parcel takes care of this for us, or if we were using Webpack, Webpack would take care of this for us, and it takes care of, basically, we're going to pass this through our dev server from the command line and into this application whenever we start it. When we start it, we could do it like this. We could say, I'm on Windows, so I'll do it like this, and then I would say like HTTP localhost 3000, and then if you're on if you're on Linux or Mac OS, you type export. So that means you've got that environment variable, and then when you ran it, it would read that. When you're going to build it, so if you did like the run the npm build script to build the static web page, it's then going to effectively like hard code whatever you've got in that environment variable into your web page. So I could change that. If I was doing a production build, I could change this to whatever it's going to be in the future. I don't know. I haven't bought a domain name for this, but it's like, it could be like it would be the API. So like we could subdomain it, api.photosphere.com or, .org or whatever it's going to be, .net. Whatever it's going to be in the future, and then you would build that, and then you would publish that, and then that's how you would point the kind of front end at the production back end. It's a pain in the butt to set this environment variable every time like that. So there's a better way that we can do it. We can use something called cross-end. I'm going to install that now as a dev dependency. So we're installing this as a dev dependency because we only ever want it in development, and it doesn't really matter for a web project like this. Oh, I spelt it wrong. This is what happens when you're trying to talk while you're trying to code. So I'm installing cross-end. I'm going to actually put that in my package.json file here. So cross-end, I'm going to set base URL. So this is the script that runs the dev server. You can see it's running Parcel here. But I want to basically point it at localhost 3000. And I'm going to copy that to my build process here that builds the static website. Ultimately, this is where I'm going to change this. So ultimately, it's going to be something like, api.photosphere.com. But I don't have that. I don't have a production deployment for this at all yet. So there's no point setting that up. We're just basically refactoring our code now so that we can actually pass that environment variable in and telling our web page which backend to talk to. So where else? I'm just going to search and find where else I've got the space URL. So every place where I use that, I'm going to pass that in from an environment variable now. It's just a nicer way to do it than what I was doing it. It's going to work in development, and it's also going to work in production in the future. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to start. So I'm just starting the web page again. So all appears to be good. I could test this further. If I wanted to, I could test this further by changing the port that the backend is running on, and then changing that environment variable to be up some other port than port 3000. That's a commit. I'll just double check my work. So I've installed, you can see here in the package.json, I've installed cross-end. There's a whole bunch of stuff gone into the package lock that I'm not that interested in. I've updated my scripts in my package.json to include cross-end base URL environment variable that sets the location or sets the URL for the backend. That's good. And then I've replaced base URL with that. So that looks good. That's one little loose end out of the way. I've got another loose end that I want to deal with now, and that is using React refs to actually get the width of the gallery. I've got the documentation open for that just to show you, just because I want to impress upon you that I don't know how to do all this stuff somehow magically. Like, I know how to do this stuff because I read the docs, I've done it before, I've practiced it, I've prototyped doing this kind of stuff. I've used it in other applications. So it's not magic that I know how to do this. It's just learning. Learning is the key, and continuous learning. And there's no doubt that I will, probably make some kind of mistake and have to come back to the docs and figure out what I did wrong. It's not a perfect process ever. I'm just going to restart the backend as well anyway, just to clear out the database. I'm going to restart the front end now. Let's upload all our files. So we'll get a bunch of test assets to work with again. Don't forget to press the upload button, otherwise they don't actually get uploaded. Let's have a look at the gallery. Okay, cool. Whenever I start a new feature or start doing something new, I feel very uncomfortable if something's broken. And, it's a good way to be, because you need to be trying to get your code, always trying to get your code back to a working state. If you've broken something or something does not add up, you want to be working towards getting it back to a working state, before you start working on the next thing, before you break it again, basically. There's different ways you could do this. Now, let's start this here. So container ref equals react.createRef. I'm going to put a div around the gallery to contain it. And I'm going to get a ref from that. So this.container ref. So this will allow me to connect to this div and basically pull out the width and the height of it. And I'm going to plug that in as the gallery width here. Instead of hard coding this 600 pixels, that's what's going to make this gallery kind of come up to the right-hand side here and stretch to the full width of the screen. So I'm going to put the gallery width now in state. And I want it to come from the container ref dot client. There's a few different options here you could use. I had to kind of experiment with this and kind of do a bit of research to figure out that it was actually client width that I wanted. And we can print this as well. So actually, it's a good idea just to if you're unsure about anything, you can console log the entire thing. Let's console log the container ref and have a look in our dev console here and see what that gives us. So that gives us the current object is a div, and it shows us all the properties on the div. And like I said, there's a whole heap of stuff here. We can't go through all this, but what I can do is I can actually pull out the current client width and just show you what that looks like. So that's 855. So that should be the width, basically, of this div going to the right-hand side. Now what I can do is I can plug that gallery width in here instead of the hard-coded 600 pixels, and magically it lines up to the right-hand side of the screen. How cool is that? Now, what it's not going to do here, is automatically resize. So you can see here I've resized the window to the full width of the screen, and it's not automatically done the layout. If I refresh, though, it is going to do that. So to handle this, we simply have to handle the resize event on the window, and then recompute our gallery layout. This is a great stepping stone. This is our gallery, almost like working the way it should. So time to do a commit. So I'm just checking over the ref stuff that I've done. I'm going to get rid of this console log. Yep, I've wrapped the gallery in a div, and I'm passing through the width of the container element as a gallery width. That worked out quite nicely. And let's get this in. Cool. All right, let's quickly add a resize event handler so that I can recompute the width of the gallery. So I'm going to make an event handler function called onResize. And this is where I want to do this recomputing, which isn't really anything much. It's really just doing resetting this gallery width here. So I'm going to copy that. I don't need to reset the items, so I'm going to remove the items. So I'm just setting state and setting the gallery width, based on the ref. And the ref is the reference to this div here that we've used to contain the gallery, so we can actually get its width and then make that the gallery width. Instead of setting gallery width there, I'll just call onResize the first time from component did mount. And now what I can do is I can also call that from the Windows resize event. And of course, to be a good citizen, I'm going to remove that when I'm done, which will be component will unmount. So before this component is effectively torn down, I'm going to remove my event listener. So this should give us the resizing, hopefully. So I'll just do a refresh. Now, you remember before when I resized this, the gallery didn't change its layout, but now it should change the layout. So it's changing the layout based on the width of this thing, and that's working quite nicely. What I would do, though, in production, I don't have time to do this now. What I would do in production is I would like to what's called debounce this. So I don't want this firing on every resize. That's a little bit expensive. Maybe I want it to fire it like every 50 milliseconds or something like that. So that would be an extra bit of work that I would do later that would just give this a little bit better performance for anyone who is actually resizing it. But this is another commit. Let's do a quick self-review and know what I'm doing. So I've added the resize function, the resize event handler, and I'm handling that resize event on the window. I'm setting that in, so when the component mounts, I'm hooking this window resize event, and when the component unmounts, I'm unhooking it here. So that all looks pretty good. Let's commit that. I think the last thing I've got to do is pagination. So the problem that we've got here is that there could be a million photos here. When our user has uploaded that many photos, that's gonna properly blow up the browser. And who knows? It's just gonna take ages to load anyway. If it did allow that to render. So what we want to do is we want to basically just render a page of images at a time. I think in this case, I want it to be like an infinite list, like an infinite scrolling list. The way Google Photos works, as you scroll down, it kind of adds more photos. That's really easy for us to do because I discovered a third-party component that can do that for us. Let me show you that. That's the React Infinite Scroller, which I found on NPM. There's so many different varieties of this kind of thing out there. It's really hard to choose the right one. I went for something that was updated fairly recently. I tried it out and it worked pretty well. I had a look at the docs. It'll look good. If you're interested in this kind of thing, if you want to use this for yourself, I advise you to read the docs, to make your own prototype, experiment with it, even look in their code. You can click through here to their code repository and you can look at their code and see how it works. This is a big time saver for me because it worked pretty well, and it's probably tricky to implement this otherwise. Now, before I update the front end, I better make some updates to the back end, because we don't have any pagination in the back end. We've got our back end running in development mode, so I'm just going to check that we've got an empty database. So we've got no assets coming back from our assets request here. So this is where I want to start with my pagination code. So I'm going to start basically by updating my test scripts here. So I'll say I want to retrieve the first page of assets. So we've got 3 test assets that we can upload in this script. You can see them here, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to be uploading those in just a second. What I want to do here, though, is I want to pass through some parameters for pagination. I like to use the terminology from MongoDB, which is skip. So we're going to skip no items, and we're going to limit ourselves to 2 items. So that's like the first page. I haven't actually wired this in the code yet, so you haven't missed anything. I'm effectively writing my tests first. This is what I call manual test-driven development. On the next one, I'm going to skip the first 2, limit myself to 2. So that'll get me the second page. And because we've only got 3 assets, the third page of assets is effectively going to be empty. So we're going to skip 4, limit ourselves to 2. This should be an empty. This should come back empty once we've got this thing working. So I'm going to go into my assets route here. This is really simple to do. Like I said, I'm already using the terminology skip and limit of MongoDB. What I can do is I can just basically, I want to plug in some values here, like, the number to skip, 0, and the number to limit ourselves to. So that would give me the first 2 assets in the collection. No matter how many assets have been uploaded, how many photos have been uploaded, that's only ever going to give me the first 2. But what I want to do here is I want to pull these out of the query parameters. The first thing I want to do is I might actually just want to look at the query parameters and just make sure they've come through okay. So if I do a console log of request.query here, and I issue a request, like I'll try this one here with skip of 4, limit of 2. I'm just going to issue that. And you can see here that's come through. So I can see that I'm getting my values through correctly. Just taking a small step there just to verify that what I expect to come through is coming through. And I should be able to pull those out to local variables now. I've got to parse them as integers because they come through as strings. You can see that here actually. You can see that that's a string. So I want to parse that to an integer. And I'll do almost the same thing for the next line of code, except I'll call it limit. And those values that I pass, I'll just pass through to the MongoDB query API. And that's my pagination implemented in the backend. So that's a fairly simple thing to do. I'll get rid of that console log. We don't need that. I'll just run a couple of tests. So at the moment, there's nothing. So no matter which ones of these, I should get back no assets from any of these tests, because there's no assets there. So pagination's not going to do anything yet. But if I issue these requests to add each of my 3 test assets, I should be able to look at 3 separate pages now. So the first page has 2 assets in the list. There's the first one. There's the second one. So then the second page should just have the third asset. So we've only got the second page is the last asset. And then the third page here is going to be no assets. So I'm going to commit that change a little bit later, but we've got that there now. We can actually use that in the front end to implement our pagination, which I'm going to do using that infinite scrolling library that I'm about to download. So install, what was it called? React Infinite Scroller. Gallery page, I think, is the right place to do this. Let's get it imported. So infinite scroll from, it completed it. That's cool. Infinite scroll from React Infinite Scroller, and we'll wrap our gallery in this. Come on, give it to me. Complete it, that's it. So we're putting the gallery inside the Infinite Scroller here. Now there's a couple of props this needs. One is has more. So this is a Boolean that tells the Infinite Scroller whether there is more data yet to be loaded. And we're gonna pass that in from a state variable, and we'll just call that has more. In my state up here in my constructor, I'm going to default that to true. So by default, we're assuming that there is more data to be retrieved from the backend. We also need to fill out this load more prop. Load more. I'll call it onload more. That's the way I like to name my event handlers. So this is going to be an async function. This is where we're going to load our data now. I'm going to move this from component did mount. We're not going to worry about loading the data when it mounts. We're going to load it the first time the infinite scroller calls our load more function. So I'll move that to there. And we want to limit ourselves to a particular page size, let's say 20 photos. And then we're going to have to add our query parameters here. So the first one is skip. And how many do we want to skip? We want to skip everything that we've already loaded. So that's everything that's currently in items. So we'll say the items.length is the currently loaded set of photos, and we want to skip those so we can load the next lot of them. And how many do we want to load? That's the limit parameter. we're going to set that to the page size. So we're going to load in chunks of 20 photos. Now, instead of just plugging those directly in, that would overwrite the previously loaded assets. We need to concatenate. So we need to make a new array of items based on the items that we've previously downloaded, and we want to concatenate that with those assets that we just got back. So this here is like the extra page or the next page of assets we just loaded, and we want to concatenate that to produce all items that are currently loaded, and we're going to set that in our state. And at this point here, we want to update this load more field. When do we want to load more? Well, if we get back less assets than what we asked for, so we're asking for 20 assets. If we get back less than that, it should mean that there's nothing left there to be loaded because we've effectively reached the end. If we do get back 20, there may or may not be more to load. Either way, if there's less than 20, that's when we want to set this to false, I think. Is that right? But the logic is the other way around, actually. So the logic is the other way around. So we want to say if we've got back the amount that we expected in the page, then there could be more to load. So that's going to evaluate to true. So we're going to tell the infinite scroller that there could be more to load. So let's see if that worked. What's this error say? Oh, so the first time this gets called, items is actually going to be undefined because it's not going to be set in the state. So to correct that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plug in an empty array of items. That'll just make that bit of code work. Okay, so I've only got I've probably, looks like I've uploaded like 6 photos here, but what I'd really need to do now to test this properly is upload my 100 photos. So let's quickly do that. I'm just going to restart my backend so that I've got a fresh, clean database to work with. I should have nothing in my gallery now. So I'm going to upload a load of photos. So let's get all these photos uploaded so we can test our infinite scroller, our pagination. Looking pretty good. Hopefully that's working, but what I want to do, I just want to double check that, there's not something weird going on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put here a console log. Every time we load more, I'm going to put a console log to say how many we loaded. Loaded more assets. And so we loaded that many more assets. And we now have this many assets. So that's just going to allow me to test that we can load this thing incrementally. So if I refresh it, you can see straight away it loads. What am I printing there? Actually, what I wanted to print there was the length. Otherwise, it's just printing out that big mess of objects. Here we go. So initially, it's loading 2 sets of 20 assets by the look of it. So we have 40 assets in. As we scroll, we should see it loading more assets. There you go. We now have 60. We now have 76. Cool. There's something going wrong at the end there because it's going off wildly, re-executing that. Whereas this load more, if we're setting that to false, I made that same mistake there as well. Let's fix that now. So if the assets.length is equal to the page size, then we want to stop loading. So this should stop that from happening now. If I just refresh that, I'm just going to scroll quickly all the way to the end. There's still something wrong here. I'm running out of time today, so I'm going to fix this offline. It's basically there, right? You can see that it's basically working. We have got a gallery. We have got pagination. I'm really happy with the result. Obviously, there's so much more that we can do with this in the future, including generating thumbnails. Obviously, we want to make the UI look more beautiful, bring in a CSS framework and put a nice header here. There's heaps of stuff to be done. And also automated testing. There's a load of things we could do with automated testing to help us test this web page as well. But that's it for this series. That's it for this live stream series. It's a wrap. All this code that I've written in the past 5 weeks is really the raw material now that's going to go into writing chapters 3, 4, and 5 of Rapid Full Stack Development. So please check out the book at rapidfullstackdevelopment.com. And I'd love to have you continue to follow the story of the Photosphere application. And that's what this book is all about. It's building the application, but the application itself is it's really just a vehicle to teach good development tactics, techniques, principles, all the stuff that's going to make you a better developer across the stack. So thank you so much for following along. It's been such a privilege to be able to kind of present this to you. And I will be back sometime in the future with more live streams. But for the moment, I've got writing to do. I've got chapters to write on Rapid Full Stack Development. But I will see you again at some time in the future. Thank you so much.